Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. My host this week is from the great state of Florida, or more specifically, Palm Beach. His name is Jim Abernethy. Hey, Jim.
Hey, how are you? Nice to be here.
I am really excited to have you on my show, and it's nice to be here as well. Our guests are about to hear from a bona fide expert, and I am going to talk to you just a little bit about what he has accomplished before we get started. Jim Abernethy is an award-winning cinematographer, author, photographer, publisher, and most importantly, conservationist. Nat Geo is his stock agent for his images. He recently received his first Emmy for a total conversation. I'm starting again, Landry. He recently received his first Emmy for a total conservation film. He is most widely known as the pioneer in large predatory cageless shark encounters and is credited with discovering the affectionate side of sharks in 2002. However, he is most passionate about the conservation of all wildlife, which is why he is here today. This is fabulous. Jim, I don't know if I've told you, but I've swam with sharks
Wow.
in off of the coast of Belize. It was
Uh-huh.
one of the most exciting, fun things I've ever done in my entire life.
That's fantastic. I'm very glad to hear that. We should all get out and swim with the sharks because
We
they're not
should.
the monsters that they're portrayed to be.
Not at all. They were nurse sharks, but one of them was 8 feet long, which means big, which means he was a big guy. And there were also stingrays.
Hmm. Well, I'm very glad to hear that. And what I'd like to talk to you about today actually started with a shark, the world's largest shark, the whale shark. But
I can't
first,
hear all about it, but I did want to mention though before you get started,
uh-huh.
I know you. Once you get started, there's no stopping you.
Okay.
that I found out how you know that a shark likes to have his belly rubbed. So, Jim,
And
how do you know if a shark likes to have his belly rubbed?
how do you know?
Because if he didn't, he wouldn't let you.
That's true. So true. Well, thank you.
They are big. They're big guys, but gentle.
Yes.
And they absolutely loved the attention they got from humans, from having belly rubs, and one of the most fun things I've ever done in my entire life. Well, anyway, enough with the jokes, because this is actually a very, very sober and serious conversation.
Absolutely. Well, for those of you that don't know me, I am a full-time ecotourism, mostly large aquatic life, whales, dolphins, porpoise, orca, sharks, manta rays, all of that. And I take people all over the world to see this kind of stuff. Although I spend the majority of my time right here in Bahamas, which is the backyard to where I live in North Palm Beach, Florida. Um, but what I want to explain to you is let me start with the end, and that is how I came across the fact that our government agency is responsible for what can only be described accurately as biblical proportions of all animal deaths from pollinators, amphibians, birds, reptiles, even mammals, in fish in huge numbers, and what I've done to try to stop that. And presently, to bring it up to speed, it also includes the death of our beloved manatees. So, how this all started was I was actually at the airport en route to my large shark encounters, the whale shark, and a friend of mine sent me a picture of a dead whale shark on a beach in Southwest Florida, and without any signs of it being fished or anything like that. And I thought, oh my God, what? How did it die? And while I spent the next couple of weeks in Mexico, I was doing heavy research when I wasn't out on the boat, trying to learn as much as I could. Right off the bat, it was blamed on what is known as red tide. Now, if you did your research, you'd find out that red tide is actually normal. It's a normal thing that happens in our oceans, but it usually only affects one species. And in this case, it was affecting all animals. Birds were dropping out of the sky, massive numbers of fish that was measured in metric tons were coming up on our beaches. The endangered Goliath grouper were found on our beaches. Alligators, dolphins, including two whales, all were dead because of this red tide. Now, I did a bunch of research in which is involved in about interviewing 35 different scientists to get their opinion. And uh, for the most part, people told me the truth, but I already knew so much that if I got wind that one of them was not answering the questions the way I expected it, I knew immediately that that was because somebody was paying them. And in other words, they were under the influence of financial compensation, so they didn't tell me the truth. And on those interviews, I would just pack it up right then and there and state the obvious. I'm under the impression that you're paid by the phosphate mines, big agriculture, or big sugar, which were initially the three different entities that were being blamed. But to get to the root of the problem, it was actually a buildup of nitrates and phosphates that was basically the gasoline on a match that turned it into a bonfire, for a good analogy. And this uh, buildup of nitrates and phosphates, I tracked by watching all the government reports on water systems. The South Florida Water Management District actually said that the nitrates and phosphates, over 90% of both, came from the tributaries north of Lake Okeechobee. So basically, if you look at a map of Florida, the water runs from Orlando south, and it normally flows through the Everglades where it's filtered through plants. But the Army Corps of Engineers, in their vast wisdom, decided to get rid of that and make the canals that goes across the state, the St. Lucie Canal, and dump water on both sides of the state, on the east and the west. So when once it said that, I knew that although probably the phosphate mines, big sugar, and big agriculture uh, played a part in it, but over 90% of the gasoline, the phosphates and nitrates, came from north of Lake Okeechobee. So I looked north. Now, north of Lake Okeechobee, people were blaming big agriculture. Well, agriculture is, cows, chickens, and pigs. There's not really any large chicken or pig farms in the state of Florida. However, there are cows. So we break cows into beef and dairy. The dairy industry, this is back in 2017, 18, and 19 that I worked on this. So this is, I would say, a cumulative year and a half over 3 years that I looked at the cause of this. And basically, the dairy industry had a 13% decline in 2018. So those companies, because of the better, healthier alternative almond nut milks, like almond milk, and the beef industry, there's only one commercial beef place in Florida, which is not much, and it hasn't changed in size. And if you think about this problem, when we realize what it is, it's going to be a hallmark moment. You're going to go, oh my God, that's the cause. And so I'm looking for substantial change. What could have happened? So I came across a fisherman that's also a pastor, that was very upset because the fish were all filled with in not physical injuries, but calluses and bruises on their body without being hit. Every fish he was catching, and he was really upset because he had a retirement home where he intended to retire and just fish, which is what he loves to do. So I went up, his name's Scott Wilson, and I went up and listened to him. And what he was talking about was the chemical warfare that the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission uses in order to control two plants. So there's two invasive plants in the state of Florida that grow so fast that without some type of management, we would not be able to take our boats on the water. So they definitely need to be managed, but they chose chemical warfare. And in the process of these 35 scientists, I ran across a gentleman by the name of Alan Stewart. He was retired ecologist. And, retired means I'm done with this, basically. So I called him on the phone. He lives, 4 hours in Fort Myers, 4 hours away from me, and spoke to him longer than I thought he would give me, and finally got up enough nerve to ask him the question that I thought would be no. Would it be okay if I came over and interviewed you? He was by far the most knowledgeable person that I had spoken to that date. And he said, Jim, you sound very determined to make change. How about I meet you at Florida's largest dead zone? Okay, Florida's largest dead zone. That's a place where they've everything's dead, and it's strange that I think it's one of the largest lakes in Florida. It's called Lake Apopka. It's right next to Disney World or Disneyland. I forget which one in Orlando. And it seems odd that just 15, 20 miles away from Disney would be this huge park that should be a water park, and it's categorized as a dead zone. And I went there, and it's on its second attempt to give it a rebirth, a restart, after everything's dead. And I met him up there, hoping that he'd give me an hour. I got a boat for us, and we were on the boat all day. I was quite surprised, and the amount of knowledge I gained from him was huge. This guy really, not only did he really know his subject, he also was passionate about making change, despite the fact that he's retired. So I took him to dinner and spoke to him, and at dinner he had to tell me. He said, Jim, I'm concerned that you're going to spin your wheels and get frustrated because of some things that you don't know about. And I said, well, what don't I know about? And he said, well, he said, first of all, the way this works, FWC is the parent company, which is huge, government ran company that's responsible for maintaining our ecosystems, life in Florida for all wildlife. So, so he said that they're in charge, but they get direction from University of Florida scientists, another big entity, and those scientists tell them what chemicals to use in order to spray, and then another third party. Water sprayers, airboats, and helicopters, and all kinds of things spray these chemicals. So he said, well, the reason you need to understand that is because he's saying that I used to be one of those scientists, and those scientists are receiving grant money from the parent company in those days was Monsanto, immensely large company. And one of the chemicals they were spraying is glyphosate. Now, I was drawn to glyphosate because we just had our first lawsuit where an individual won like 290 million or something. I don't know the exact number, but and so I knew it causes cancer. And then I did extensive research into glyphosate, and found, oh my God, although it's sold in, most people know it as Roundup, but truthfully, Roundup is a marketing name. The active ingredient is glyphosate. But if you look at it, it's only 2% active ingredient, not much on Roundup. And so I looked at the chemicals, which are free to the public. You can go online and see what FWC is actually spraying, and it's scary. There's so many different chemicals, and the majority of these chemicals say do not use with wildlife. And I'd say close to 90% of them say do not use in the water. So, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're using them in the water with wildlife, and the majority of the chemicals are some type of herbicide, and glyphosate is sold as a herbicide. But if you do your homework, and of course I do, it's actually a registered antibiotic. Now, let me say that a little bit differently. In every lake, river, canal, and aquifer, aquifers is where 90% of our drinking water comes from, they are putting an antibiotic in our drinking water, and we're all on it. Now, you might say to yourself, well, herbicides kill plants, and we're humans. But the truth of the matter is, we rely on plants for our existence. You see, what happens is when you take in food, water, everything, it goes into our digestive tract, the strongest single cell lining in our whole body, which is our digestive tract. And this bombardment of antibiotics day after day after day, usually 3 or more times per day, it kills the bacteria in there. The bacteria which is responsible for removing the proteins, vitamins, and
Good
minerals that our body
bacteria.
needs. Right.
Bacteria is our buddy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it kills that and causes something that is really terrible, but that's not the real bad thing, and that's called leaky gut syndrome. It cuts a hole through the digestive tract, and food permeates into our chest cavity and decomposes. A terrible, terrible thing. However, just past the single cell lining is what new scientists, this is new science now, in the last 15 years, are calling the second brain. And the second brain, it works like this. Like, say, for example, I cut my finger and it bleeds a little bit, and I don't do anything. The second brain, these cells communicate and say, we're leaking, and they coagulate and stop the bleeding. And then if you do nothing, and then they push white blood cells to fight infection. That second brain is cellular communication. All our cells communicating, say that we have a problem, let's fix it. And they rely on a bacteria in order to communicate. So the bacteria is dead. And so we are, if you look at a chart of all chronic illness, and you'd have to look at them individually, you would see that around 1996 we were having chronic illness about the same degree. By the way, I'm describing a graph to you. This one is hundreds of thousands of people that die, and this one is a time scale. And if you look at it, no matter what chronic illness you choose, it goes steady until you get to around 1996. In 1996, it goes almost straight up, and exponential growth, no matter what chronic illness you look at. And if you overlay a graph of how much glyphosate we use, you will see that in 1996 is when they started selling massive amounts, because they hired a marketing firm that the marketing term was a farmer that used to take care of 10,000 acres can now take care of 100,000 acres in less than half the time. And little farms went to big farms, and Monsanto delivered the genetically modified seed. Basically, you could spray it with this antibiotic and it wouldn't die. It would still look great, but because it's an antibiotic, glyphosate, it kills the soil. So the so-called, superfoods are foods that cure chronic illness in just themselves without doing anything to it, like the tomato fights cancer. Well, these tomatoes, although they look good in their genetically modified seeds sprayed with glyphosate and other chemicals, although it looks good, it no longer has any nutritional value. And this was uncovered by a triple board certified scientist that specialized in cancer, and his other 2 board certifications, I'm guessing one is nutrition. But anyway, he was curing people through superfoods, and some people didn't get better. And so he went to their house thinking they were cheating on foods. But by the way, I'm talking about the brilliant Dr. Zach Bush. And he went to their houses to see if they were cheating, and turns out they weren't. So he took the food home and checked them, and the superfoods were no longer superfoods, and that's because the soil where they grew was dead. Now, just to get everyone's brain to think about this for a second, what that means is that when you buy, what is it called? Foods that you think is healthier. What's the term? It slipped my mind for a second. Organic.
Oh,
When you buy organic food, it means that there's no chemicals on it. It was grown naturally. But the truth of the matter is, there's no law and there's no one checking to see if your soil is okay before you start growing. The soil needs to be tested. In other words, I could go buy a farm and produce and sell or superfoods and sell them as organic, even though they're not, because there's no law to check the soil to see if the soil was sprayed before I bought it to make sure. And we still don't know how long it takes for Mother Nature to cure all this. Well, anyway, um, let me finish with the conclusive thought so that I can connect the dots and show you how I know without a doubt that this is the cause of red tide, biblical proportions across all animal groups, as well as declining health in humans, as well as the manatees starving to death in Florida, which is still happening. Well, so I looked at 2017, 18, and 19. I looked at the chemicals that they were spraying, as well as how much they increased. And in I think it's 2017, they increased the use of glyphosate. Well, that's the main one that I have problems with, although they're all bad. I increased the rate of glyphosate use by 250% according to their numbers. In other words, let me explain what happened. Basically, they sprayed glyphosate, and of course, everything becomes resilient to antibiotics. That's why we don't use them. They're too dangerous.
yes.
So the plants become resilient. They ask the scientists what to do. The scientists who are getting financial income to continue studying the use of glyphosate for maintaining plants tells them to increase the dosage. And sure, that works for a little while until they become resilient to that level of dosage, and then it happens again. So let me explain what I am calling the cycle of death. The way this works, average depth in inland waters is about 6 feet, and there's lots of waterways and lots of lakes, rivers, canals, aquifers in the state of Florida, and all these are sprayed by the state of Florida, unless it's private property and you say no. But so they spray the chemicals on the top, and the chemical dies. The top, say if it's 6 feet, the top 1.5 feet die, and they sink down to the bottom. The plants themselves go back to their original state, which is nitrate. The chemicals, which most of which are about 40% phosphorus, go back to their original state, and they collect in the bottom as mud. And this mud builds up and builds up and builds up until finally you can't drive your boats on it. At that point, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, that is responsible for maintaining our ecosystems, thinks that it's best to drain the lake and bulldoze the mud out and then fill the lake back in so we can drive our boats. And of course, we all know that doesn't harm the wildlife at all. I'm just joking. But although it's not funny because this is such a serious topic. So anyway, this mud collects and collects and collects and collects in all the lakes, rivers, and canals and aquifers all across the state of Florida. And their way of getting it, which is called scraping the bottom, drain the lake, scrape the bottom, is one way. The other way that happens is the massive amount of water would have to dump somewhere. And if it was churned up before that happened, what I'm describing to you is a hurricane that goes up the middle of the state. And if a hurricane goes up the middle of the state, massive amount of wind that churns up all the mud, massive amount of water. The Army Corps of Engineers has to open up the dikes to let the water flow out to both sides, producing nitrate and phosphorus to both sides, and that is the fuel. And if you wanted to confirm that what I'm saying is true, all you would need to do is look at the hurricanes and mark down that when they hit, and then mark down the worst red tides of Florida, and you will see a direct correlation. Right after the hurricanes that go up like Irma, this is the one that hit us and caused the worst red tide we've had, and then it dumped all this out. Now, if you think about it, just to get back to the chemicals, presently they increased the dosage of this. I warned them back in 2018 or 19, I forget exactly when, because I became so depressed about this, I had to take a break. But Alan Stewart that night at dinner tells me that that first of all, there's corruption. People are getting paid, and you're never going to win because these are huge companies. And I said, well, let me see what I can do, and I'll get back to you. So I got back to him, and I said, I just wanted to, and this is, by the way, the next day. I got back to him and I said, well, I just wanted to tell you what I've done. I said, what? And I said, first of all, I called a private investigator to investigate the corruption that's going on. I called Aaron Brockovich's team because they're used to fighting big companies over water pollution, and spoke to their her attorney, and gave them all my files. And then I contacted the largest investigative reporting team in the world, which is Anderson Cooper, and am in direct communication with them, and I gave them all my files as well, and they're taking this on because of what I just explained to you. So they did take this on, and Alan was really surprised, thinking outside the box. If you want to fight a big company that's got tons of money, you need to fight them with tons of money, and nothing better than a few lawsuits to show what's really going on. So what happened was Aaron Brockovich brought a team down here for about 2 or 3 weeks, gathering the names of people with cancer. At that time, cancer was the big scare because of the glyphosate, and lawsuits are being won all over the world against glyphosate. The the private investigator didn't get to me for a while, but CNN was talking to me constantly, and they actually did a report, and the report on the segment for TV was going to air, and the same day that it was going to air, it was the day that the private investigator found the numbers of the corruption, and it was huge. The aquatic plant management team of FWC, there's a lot of people getting paid. In fact, one of my friends, Mike Nepper, actually uncovered who's getting paid and how much, and actually put it on a YouTube video. Another little guy taking on giants because this is where he lives, and you got to applaud those people. And anyway, I shared the findings with CNN, and the program that they had edited together never aired. And at that point, I lost hope that basically got turned over to their legal department because Monsanto is an immensely large company, not to mention FWC, University of Florida, all of these people or entities. So basically, I lost hope. And then like 8 or 9 months later, I got a call that we're coming to Florida, CNN, and we're going to do the story. And unfortunately, I was out in another country, and I was not available to be, sad, not available to be interviewed. But I did send them to both Scott Wilson and Mike Nepper, and they did a beautiful job. They made an 11.5-minute segment. And you can have a link to it if you want, so people can see it. But and now to bring things up to speed.
And it's about time to wind up because we do have.
Yeah. So basically, to bring things up to speed, since then we've had a massive die out of our manatees. And if you look at the FWC, it sprays close to 1 million gallons a year to kill plants. The manatees only eat plants. The plants are dead. We've killed them all, and our manatees are starving to death. So I put a petition up that now has over 180,000 signatures. At the time, originally to stop the state-sanctioned poisoning of our lakes and rivers, and then I updated it because of all the manatees. Because manatees, people love manatees here, especially in the state of Florida, and that has definitely helped. But there's still too much corruption, and it's still going on. We're still spraying, even though they could just switch to mechanical harvest and stop this. I think they'd rather receive a paycheck than to kill another revenue source. So that's where we are today.
Well, that is an amazing story, and it's fabulous. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for connecting the dots, which is easy, much more difficult than one might think. You really have to get into the weeds, no pun intended, to really start connecting the dots. But if you just look, you can figure it out. It might take a little longer than you thought. It might take, a little harder, be a little harder than you thought. But yes, it can be done. So, Jim, I have just a couple of questions
Sure.
about this amazing story. So one of the things you mentioned is that you were asking questions, but they refused to answer your questions.
Mhm.
And so what goes through your mind when you're asking reasonable, valid questions and you won't get an answer? I mean,
Well,
what's going on?
I know the answer, and when they don't answer, I immediately say corruption. Somebody's paying you to not tell the truth, which is sad. That means they sold their soul. They'd rather have their families under poisonous conditions than to tell the truth. I can't do that. I
It
wouldn't
is a
sleep.
very reasonable assumption, Jim. I agree
Well, I
that
verified
they
it.
won't, if they won't answer a question, you already know the answer to it. They won't answer that there's
And I verified it. It was true. The
right,
people, the
right.
scientists that I shut down during the interview, I went right to their website and looked at funding, and found exactly what I assumed, and I knew not to go to those companies anymore.
And so our listeners out there, beware, be vigilant. And when you won't get an answer to your reasonable question, there's a very good reason. And that your radar should go up, the proverbial radar. And now I know you mentioned something else, which is not something I would, okay, you mentioned, Landry, I'm starting all over. You talked about lawsuit and the value of lawsuit. And I, certainly in my effort to beat the big guys, I have threatened lawsuit several times, and it works. But there's just one thing that you have to do before you threaten lawsuit, before you file lawsuit. Someone's going to ask you, did you just sit down and talk about it and try to talk about it? Did you set up a meeting to discuss it? They're always going to answer that question. And in your case, Jim, we know you did.
Well, I left out the meetings that I had with both Republicans and Democrats, and certainly some of them actually used my talking points at presentations on TV, and some change did. They now use much less glyphosate, but if you look at the rest of the chemicals, you're
Mhm.
thinking, oh my God, why is the government poisoning our drinking water? It just doesn't make sense.
And at the end of the day, if you when it comes time for you to file your lawsuit, or just threaten your lawsuit, you would be surprised. I don't know if Jim, in your experience, but just the threat of lawsuit is often enough to get the big guys to stop what they're doing, just the threat of lawsuit. But sometimes
Mhm.
they have to file. But if you can answer that question and say, yes, I did have a sit down, I did have a volunteer to discuss the issue. If you can show that, you're good.
Well, it's public knowledge. In fact, I talked to the FWC at their public participation as new information. In fact, I just did my last one about 10 days ago, and I brought it up again, and explained. But they only give you 3 minutes to talk. Other people could give you another 3 minutes, but they shut that down. So I really struggled to tell you what I told you in less than 3 minutes. But I did pull it off, and at the next meeting I'm going to do the follow-up, which is going to be all about the manatees.
Which is fabulous. You pointed out to our listeners. I'm familiar with manatees. I live in the South. I live in an area where we know what manatees are, but they're gentle. They're vegetarian. They're affectionately called sea cows, and in the state of Florida, they are popular. And so there you have it. You have a popular animal, and people are willing to sign a petition when you've got something that is already popular. And so that's a good thing
Well,
to.
we're going to see. I changed it over to the manatees, but I haven't really had the time because of the pandemic to actually get out and talk to people because nobody wants you to come over and talk to them during the pandemic,
That's
which is very sad. But that's all changing, and I think the future we can do these type of things, and
absolutely.
hopefully it'll make a huge change.
So Jim there's no question in anyone's mind who's listened to him, he's a busy guy. And he's got a lot of work on his plate, and he's got his job, and he's got his journey and his mission. But I want to point out to everybody something Jim said, is he noticed that 90% of the problem was north of Lake Okeechobee. And so what Jim did, which is really, really brilliant, is he said, where is the majority of the problem coming from? Because he's a great person, but he's just one person. And Jim made a great decision, I feel, and looking to, where is most of the problem coming from and going after that. Can you elaborate?
I looked at public records, South Florida Water Management. Not only was it in their data, they actually wrote it that
Mm.
over 90% of these two products, phosphorus and nitrates, is coming from the tributaries north of Lake Okeechobee. And during the time, what was in the news is that people are spraying their yards. People don't spray their yards anywhere near as much as the 5 days a week that the FWC sprays with a chemical and spray boats millions of gallons, and this just accumulates and accumulates until finally it gets pushed out to its side. In other words, we're going to have another biblical proportions of all animal deaths on both sides of the state the next time a hurricane goes up the middle of the state.
And we know when the hurricane is coming, unfortunately. We know it's
Yes,
coming.
just a matter of time.
Jim, I want to commend you for something you've been incredibly consistent and good at, and that is crediting your experts, your expert advisor. I think you must have mentioned the name between our conversation today and at other times. I think that perhaps the names of 10 or 15 different advisors has come out of your mouth, and you were very, very quick to credit your advisors. And the beautiful thing is these advisors, that's all the thanks they really want. Just to know that their advice is being used,
Well,
and
they want change,
they want
and
change.
the one thing that if you do your research is, I've been fighting for wildlife for 40 years, and I win campaigns. And why do I win? Well, all I need to do is point out the obvious to the people and let them decide what's going on. But I win the majority of my campaigns, like the Save the Goliath Grouper. I just fought it for the fourth time. The first three times we won. The fourth time, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission decided to kill 200 of them, even though you can't eat them, even though you can't sell them. Yeah, the only thing you can really do with them is take a trophy picture. But we killed this critically endangered animal. The FWC went so far as to have their own scientists proclaim that it's not endangered. So, but we have to fight for
Will
what we
surprise
love.
us anymore, Jim, right? But people wonder, if you see a problem in your community and you think to yourself, well, I don't have the knowledge to fix this problem. Advisors and experts will come to you. They will come. I mean, Jim, how many people have come to you, have sought you out to provide advice and guidance that
Well, without the experts, I wouldn't become an expert myself. I rely on experts to show me the truth. And the nice thing is that these experts may not have the ability, or they don't believe they can make change. I believe I'm unstoppable. If you give me a good cause, I will fight for it. And through these fights, I spearheaded the Save the Shark campaign in the Bahamas when the Taiwanese government had put out they had applied for a shark permit to kill sharks, and I spearheaded that project and got the whole country to protect sharks in that country. They're completely protected there in the Bahamas. Yet Florida, just 60 miles away, kills 1.6 million per year. And for what? I mean, it's a waste of time. They, according to the fishermen, the commercial fishermen kill 900,000, and recreational fishermen kill 700,000, mostly for the trophy, because people don't eat shark, and it's
Right,
illegal to sell the shark fin, and we're
right.
still killing them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But Jim, I think you've come up with a gem all on your own, which I think is brilliant. So you pointed something out, which is very true, that a lot of your experts out there, they may be knowledgeable, they may have a lot of information, but they don't believe that you can do anything about it, or they often don't think anything can be done about it. That's something Jim knows, something I know is yes, you can. Yes,
Yes.
you can. Just because the big guys are big and may have a lot of money doesn't mean they're unbeatable. Not at
Correct.
all.
Correct.
Not
If
at
you look,
all.
if you look at the history of our planet, the only people that have really made change is small groups of passionately driven, intelligent people. It's small groups that make change. It's not the big groups.
Right.
It's not government entities that are making great change. It's small groups of individuals passionately driven to make change, and they're unstoppable. So,
Yes, yes. And the only thing I can add to that, Gem, is that and their reliance and dependence on the experts.
absolutely. You need to know
Absolutely.
what you're talking about to make change.
Right. So, Jim, is there anything you'd like to add for our listeners before we sign off?
No, I think we've covered it very well, and I really appreciate you taking the time to let me speak on behalf of those that cannot speak.
I'm moved to tears by
Mhm.
those word of
Which,
fact.
by the way, is the
Yeah,
name of my nonprofit, Wildlife Voice,
I love it. I
wildlifevoice.org.
love it. For
So
anyone,
thank you. Mhm.
that would like more information about Jim's work, Jim, what would you say is the best online source for them?
Well, if you search Wildlife Voice, one word,
Mhm.
.org, there's email addresses there that you can email me directly, or I'm on Instagram and all the social networks. But Instagram is the main one that I use to make change, as well as Wildlife Voice Inc. On Instagram. Or just reach out to me. You can find me. Whether you spell my name properly or improperly, you'll still find me. So
It's
thank
not
you very much.
Abernathy, it's
Yeah,
Abernethy with an
it's
E.
Abernethy, Nethy, but I think there's more stuff online now with my name misspelled. But as long as they're talking about me and the change, then it's all good. Thank you so much.
And also, you're so welcome. And also going to include a link to that petition to save the manatees.
Oh, thank you so much. That will really, really help. And thank you for all your followers. I really appreciate all your help immensely. Thank you.
You're welcome, Jim. Jim, stay with me. I'm just